before diving all the way in?
Recording is on.
All right, we're now live. Thank you. So again, this is Kai Holland. I'm up in Anchorage, Alaska. I know there's some others of you that are here, and I'm really pleased that everyone's been able to join us for this session to talk a little bit about the journey that a couple people have taken in their startup adventures. This is part of a series of events that have been scheduled over the next few weeks, leading up to the Startup Weekend that will be held at the beginning of October 1st through 3rd, focusing in on no-code type business model development. We'll talk a little bit more about that a little bit later in there. But these events are designed to try and engage some more people in the startup opportunities that are there. I know I've spent the last year putting in a lot of time trying to explore the nature of all the disruption that we're seeing in this world. We've been kind of turned upside down. I believe there's a new normal that is coming out of this work. And I think it's the startup community and the innovators that really have a tremendous opportunity and a role in helping us make this transition into some sort of new normal. And I'm always excited to work with founders and innovators who are seeing the opportunities even when times are really challenging. And we've certainly seen that in the last year or so. The session today, we've invited a couple founders that have taken this journey of creating some startups. Jennifer Lufro from Alpine Fit, as I mentioned, I think just before the recording started, ended up not being able to join us today. She's got doing the COVID dance with the family at this point, and needed to focus there. So we wish her and her family well at that point. But we do have Laura Oden and Ayla Rogers from Pandere Shoes here today. And I just wanted to mention briefly that one of the things that I've observed is that the women founders in our Alaska ecosystem have just been amazing to watch, and have really proven both the capability of the Alaskan startup ecosystem, but really have shown a level of leadership and discipline to the startup path that has always impressed me. And I know I'm going to paint a broad brush and maybe piss off a few guys, but I've watched the guys in our ecosystem going big, going bold, trying to grab a whole bunch of money, with the startup VCs. And the women in our ecosystem have sat down, gotten practical with their business plans, their models, practical with building the business, have been, judicious in their efforts to raise funds, raising it when they needed it, but not going after just because that was the path to follow. And consistently, they are making this steady progress with their businesses and growing it and asking the hard questions of themselves and their business model and their advisors to grow their businesses. And I think they continue to be a model for us, as I think of both these two, but also Jennifer, who's not with us today, or Piper, or Heather. There's a long list of them. And there's something to be learned, and something I think for all of us to pay attention to with the path that these women have taken in growing their businesses. So by way of a little more specific introduction, Ayla and Laura both, I got to know them generally in the startup ecosystem, but they came to a startup weekend. I don't know now when it was. 2015, 2016, someplace back in there. Maybe they'll remember when it was. And they dove into a challenge. I'm going to ask them to tell us a little bit more about that in a moment. But they dove in through a startup weekend and built a team there that continued to explore an opportunity that they saw, and have continued to grow a business, Pandere Shoes, that is now successfully running, building some very unique, novel shoes for a specific population of folks, and have continued to explore different challenges of their organization, different ways of organizing the work that they do, the financing that they've done, how they've handled outsourcing versus doing work internally. And I think they're just a wonderful company and a wonderful set of co-founders to to talk with about what they're doing. So I've talked probably too much. I've been accused of talking in paragraphs, and so probably have once again. So what I'd like to do is start off and ask each of them to give us a little bit of background on what they're doing, but I'm going to kind of frame this in a specific way. And Laura, I'd like you to go first, but what I'm going to ask you to do is to introduce yourself, but also tell us about Pandere Shoes now, just so that people understand what the shoe company is about, what you're doing now, and just so we kind of know where you've landed, because we're going to then back way up a long ways. But just tell us your background, and then Ayla, just so you are ready after Laura, I'm going to circle back and ask you to kind of jump back to the other end of this in terms of what you're doing now, but also kind of the genesis of where you guys met. So I'm going to kind of bookend it to begin with, if that makes sense. So Laura, if you could start off and tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of what the company is now and where you're at.
Sure. Well, Pandere makes expandable footwear. We started trying to make footwear for people like me. I have a chronic foot swelling condition. I knew there was millions of people like me. And so we make shoes that expand in the right places for people who can't get into off the rack shoes. That's kind of the 10-cent version of what we do right now. Does that answer your question, Kai?
Yeah, and just a little bit about you. What's your background? And
Oh, okay. Yeah, my background, the last 13 years, I was working for Alaska Native Medical Center. And so I had an opportunity to be in quite a few different areas of the primary care South Central Foundation. So I had a lot of healthcare background, not clinical, more administrative. I did more administrative management. I managed several clinics. I also had a part of my work there where I was doing process improvement. So I really had an opportunity through South Central Foundation to be in organizational development, which gave me a lot of training on process improvement and how to make things more efficient. I think that really helped me going into Pandere. And then the last place I worked at South Central Foundation was in the finance department doing business planning. So prior to that, I had owned a couple of very small businesses, but a lot of my healthcare experience that happened right before Pandere was very relevant to starting this business now.
Very cool. So, and then Ayla, if you could introduce yourself, but now take it from the other direction. Why did you show up at a startup weekend?
Cool. That's a great question, Kai. And you may not remember, but you were at my very first startup weekend in 2010. And prior to that, I had been trying to find a community like that for many years. I grew up kind of in obscurity on a little farm up in Wasilla, homeschooled, had very little connections when I left in high school to go make my way in the world. And I knew I wanted to be an entrepreneur. I'd read all the motivational books. I'd heard about that was the way to make it big. And I always loved taking ideas from something in your head to something you can touch and feel. And so I was trying to find my place at that time, really struggling in college because there was no school of entrepreneurship back then. There was business school, there was accounting school. I wasn't particularly good at either. But when I went to that first startup weekend, we built something. And I got to see other companies that are actually made something physical that you could touch. And I was really inspired. So I kept going. I kept, thankfully, getting introduced to people at the boardroom as it was first getting started and was really plugged in. And then in walked Laura in 2016 with this idea to make footwear. And everybody else was talking about oil and gas and tech. So that was a really fun conversation. But man, by the end of that first meeting with Laura, we realized what a huge idea it was and what a huge impact it had on millions of people. Foot swelling is not a sexy problem, but it's a problem. And so many people have it. And just watching Laura share, be vulnerable and share some of the struggles she had with her life and seeing our customers connect with that and seeing now thousands of people so happy with their footwear, so much happier with their lives. Like, that's a real business. And it's been really cool over the past decade to realize what real business looks like. So, but yeah, from there, Laura and I spent, and Celia, our other co-founder, we spent many years like taking that idea and turning it into a reality. Now it's just Laura and I running the company, and we've had some really big hurdles over the last year. And I again go back to, we were the right team at the start, and we still are the right team. And just as much then as now, we're dedicated to making this company work. So
sounds great. Thanks. Laura, one of the things that has been interesting to watch, and I wonder if you would kind of expand on this, is, you did show up at that startup weekend, and you put that idea out there, and somehow you got connected up with a couple other people. And I think that's a real challenge for a lot of entrepreneurs in general, or people that don't even think they're an entrepreneur yet. What was your experience in going to some place, sharing an idea, and that process of connecting with somebody else and actually forming a group to do something? And what does that tell you, or what do you tell people about how to approach that challenge of engaging other people in an idea, and the hard parts of that, and maybe the good parts about that you find afterwards? And I know you've had a commitment to a regular weekly conversation for a long time that kind of kept the wheels turning. And I think there's something magic that you did or figured out there to keep this thing going. But what was your experience in having an idea and trying to connect with others?
I mean, that startup weekend was really a testament to something. I mean, first off, it was a very inspiring event. And I think the main thing that was happening for me, I don't know if you remember the details of this, but the idea had gotten into the main grouping of things that we could work on. But then there was, one rule, which is you cannot be a team of one.
Exactly.
That's the only rule. So I had to have somebody else be on my team if we were going to be able to work on the idea. And I will say, like, externally, I was just trying really hard to be super cool and not let anything show about what was going internally. But internally, I was like, I am not leaving without working on this idea. And I had, I think I had come up to you and say, what do I do? Do you have any suggestions? And you said, hey, go talk to Ayla. I sat down with Ayla and showed her a little bit of what I was thinking of. And within a few minutes, Ayla was like, hey, I can give you, a lot of the people were working on parts of other projects. So I got a little bit of Celia and a little bit of Ayla. And I think as soon as we started working on it, it became apparent right away that there was a lot to work on. And I think in some of the other groups, maybe there wasn't as much clarity about the direction of the idea. I mean, of course, it was our first time talking about it, and my first time ever talking with anybody about it. So there wasn't really any traction. But I think the short answer to your question, which is what made that unique and maybe what carries forward to keep it going, I think it's I really think it's just your level of passion, your level of dedication and persistence, because you can't do it without that. If you're not pretty like called upon and obsessed with it, I just don't think it'll fall apart. There's too many ways to get it derailed. So you have to be sort of attached to the idea enough to just really want to keep on working on it. And I think that's what's held us together through all these years.
Ayla, how did that work from your side of it? Because this wasn't your idea. You weren't the one who needed, an expandable shoe. Here was somebody who had this passionate idea. How did that connection work, and what's kept that working?
You don't always need to be the person in the driver's seat. Sometimes the role that you need to play is the person looking at the map next to the driver. And so I've always loved other people's energy and ideas, and I haven't particularly needed to be the one to come up with it, to get really connected to it. And I will say, once we started interacting with customers, which was pretty immediately, we actually started talking to people. We created a Facebook group that was closed and specifically for people with foot swelling. It was very clear that this company could have a big impact on people's lives. And that interested me, and it still does.
Mm-hmm. So I want to circle back now to what I consider kind of the tough question. And I've pondered how to frame it, and I haven't come up with an answer. So I'm just going to kind of lurch into it. But I alluded to it at the beginning. And that is that it's my observation that the startup companies that I've seen here in Alaska, led by women, are different than a lot of the other startups that I've seen here, in terms of the level, the amount of time that you've taken in really digging into the business, and the careful decision about when to go off and start trying to find money, and the traction that you wanted to establish before just lurching out and growing. And I differentiate that from some of the other startups that have been a little more quick to jump into the accelerator process, quick to get into trying to raise a lot of money. And I see overall, in general, the startups led by women here have, I think, been more practical and more measured in their steps. And I'm curious what the two of you think about that, whether that's nonsense and I'm looking for something that's not there, or if you see something unique, because I know you have a lot of experience both, in the Alaska ecosystem, but you've gotten out now and been nationally involved. You won the Coffin Foundation 1 in a Million competition. Laura just won the Northwest Fast Pitch Women's competition last week. So you've seen both the Alaska ecosystem, but you've also been exposed to a lot of companies in other parts of a lot of other parts of the country. And I'm wondering what you think is different about startups led by women. Are they different? What's different about them? And what have you learned and seen? I'll leave it to either one of you to jump into that and either tell me I'm full of gray-haired man hooey or what.
I mean, it's a really, really hard question to answer, because I don't really think we have a whole lot of interaction with a lot of the day-to-day decisions and experiences from other startups. To be honest with you, most of the people that we have connected with are women-owned businesses, and that's not just in Alaska, but it's also elsewhere. So it could be that we are self-selecting in that the people we're interacting with are women-owned businesses. There's a filter there. I think that one reason why it's a little hard to answer that question, Kai, is because, I think those of us in Anchorage know that we had sort of one ecosystem that was kind of a real hub for a while. And Ayla and I, Pandere, grew up in that ecosystem, that hub. And that was a place where we could really learn about other businesses and what they were doing. And then there was a disruption on that. And really, since then, we haven't had that same kind of interaction with people, other businesses. So I struggle on how to answer it, partly because we are primarily connecting with other women-owned businesses. And I feel like it's a little unfair for me to try to assess whether there's a difference or not. I mean, I could make some assumptions. I don't know that those are useful. I mean, I wonder if, I don't know. I don't actually, I'm going to stop.
What do you think, Ayla? The same heavy sigh.
Yeah, I can't really speak to that specific question, Kai.
Mm-hmm.
I think my observation has been just with the companies I've had the opportunity to interact with. There's a lot of tenacity out there,
Mm-hmm.
and I've had two failed startups, and I've gone down to the bitter end, and I just have so admiration for what companies are trying to do, and I have a lot of empathy when they go wrong, when they go belly up, because I've been there,
Mm-hmm.
and you know sometimes that's the way it goes, and it's amazing how there's always another opportunity to hop on a really great ship like I did with Pandere. So
All right.
I mean, I'll just add this, Kai, that some of the women-owned businesses in Anchorage that are doing well, they're starting from a standpoint of they have a really good idea.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I do think that's a really essential step. You have to have a pretty supremo idea to make it as a startup. If your idea is kind of mediocre, it doesn't take long before you get squashed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think most of the women-owned businesses, I'm very impressed with their ideas. The actual nugget of the business seems to rise to the top as a really top idea, and therefore maybe that's why it's going forward as opposed to other businesses. So
Mm-hmm. No, I think there's a good observation in there, because the startups that I think of in the women founded companies are doing things that have real value real early on. It's not maybe not as speculative about trying to, if we build it, maybe somebody will come. You're already moving into a space where there's a clear need, and you're then trying to figure out how to build a business model to satisfy that need. So let's kind of pivot off of that for a second, although I may come back and nudge it some more at some point. The process of looking for funding, I kind of set you up from the standpoint that really you did a lot of bootstrapping with this business for a while and avoided going out too soon looking for funding. What was your thinking, and how has it evolved along in terms of, when you were holding back from engaging and looking for funding and getting funding, and then how did that transition as you started actually deciding you needed funding? Well, what's been your startup journey in terms of funding and the challenges you've had and the decisions you've made about when to pursue it and when not to? Leave it for either one of you that wants to dive into that one.
Laura, I'll just start. So kind of tagging on what Laura said about having a really good idea, that got us money. It helped us win competitions. It helped, and that was some really early stage bootstrapping. And then we didn't have to go out and raise money to keep the idea going, to have a little bit of runway to keep the ship moving. And that helped. So bootstrapping, looking for competitions, getting some notoriety, like winning that 1 in a million competition. That was really great. And Alaska has a lot of really neat competitions, the business plan competition, the Arctic Innovation Summit. Those really helped us. And that gave us enough runway to connect with the people who understood our business more. You touched on the fact that what we did well was kind of connecting with people and getting our idea out there. It took us a couple of years, but we got into the footwear industry. And then when we got into the footwear industry, those investors, those mentors, they understood the problem so much more and so much more depth than I think just a standard investor would have. So you had a lot less, if you will, due diligence that was required, because they knew the problem. They knew that nobody else in the footwear industry was solving it. So that was really helpful. And we did raise money kind of pre-revenue, and that got us off the ground. And a lot of that was, again, just connections we already had. So it was, that whole process kind of led into each other.
yeah, I would say we really leaned into contests, and that's one thing I would say to anybody who is considering a startup. I would say if I was going back and giving myself advice from 6 years ago, I would say do every single contest that comes across your path. Don't second guess it. I mean, there might be some that you would reject because it's not in the right space. So yeah, reject those. If if it's a contest for horticulture and you're doing shoes, then no. But any contest that is a potential contest or a potential, I would absolutely say do every single one of them. I don't think we did every single one that came across our path. I wish we had. Partly because it forces you into articulating your idea in a way that's structured, and it's hard to get there on your own. So those contests are educational. I mean, it's not, it's almost like being in a little tiny mini course or an accelerator of some sort. You do a contest, you're forced into articulating your idea and addressing some of the issues. And then, if you're lucky, you will win some contests. If your idea is good, you will win some contests. And that will give you some early runway that'll help you move forward. I think Ayla and I and Celia also, we felt strongly that the contests were very, very positive process for starting a business. Then we did an actual accelerator. I think if I had my druthers, I would have done another accelerator between the time that we did that first one and now. I think COVID really interrupted the process of us gaining advice, which is probably the main thing that we have been lacking for the last year, is connecting to the right expertise. And I think connecting with the right expertise is equally as valuable. It's equally as valuable as money, for sure.
Sure. So one of the things that I've seen the two of you and Pandere Shoes do, I think, uniquely well. It's been different than what I've typically seen, is really exploring the use of revenue redemption financing strategies. And I'm wondering if you'd like to say a little bit more about both your choice to pursue revenue redemption investment versus a more traditional give away a piece of your business, equity for taking investment, and what led you to that focus on revenue redemption, and what have you learned from diving into that world of trying to use the cash flow from the business to finance the business?
So
you want to go, Ayla? Go ahead.
I just have a quick thought. I would say the best revenue redemption model that we've seen is actually kind of easy access financing that's already out there. Clearbank, Shopify, and we've talked to other investors. They're wonderful loans. They take a little piece of your, I think they take a small percentage of your revenue each day, each sale that you make, but they're easy to apply for. And it's just kind of headache free. And yeah, that frees up some capital so you can buy inventory, you can pay for marketing ads. So that has been really helpful when we've been in a pinch, and we've paid back all those loans too. So it feels good to be able to get cash quickly. Obviously, we all want to be in a position where we can go to and get a 5% interest loan. That would be wonderful. But, we're not there. We're working our way to be there. But in between now and then, having that access to money is really great.
Yeah, I would say that there's two different kinds of revenue redemption things that we've pursued. One was an actual investment where we brought on an investor with a revenue redemption model. I think, I don't think that was probably a great arrangement for us. I think, if we had it to do over again, we probably would make some different choices. I think that, it is hard at the stage that we're at. I think a lot of business owners that are at the stage that we're at have a pretty hard time understanding the various different ways of onboarding investment. I consider us to be further ahead than in terms of understanding onboarding investment. I consider us to be further ahead than maybe a lot of other businesses in Anchorage, but I consider us to be incredibly underinformed compared to the larger potential. And I would say that's a real area of weakness in our ecosystem. It's one that we should really probably focus on beefing up, because, it's very hard to teach someone how to onboard investment before you need it, because it's a very now specific problem. And there's 1,000 ways to slice this egg. And, if you're not familiar with 800 of them, it's hard to understand the ramifications and, all of that. So I would say revenue redemption has a lot of potential. And the one that Ayla referred to, which is these, if anybody wants to follow a really interesting founder, it's Michelle, I'm forgetting her last name, who founded Clearbank. She's Canadian. It's a Canadian company, Clearbank. It's called Clearco now. And she basically was an investor. She had started her own businesses. She'd been successful, I think exited, and she was an investor. She had money. And she said, I watched these people come and ask for money every single time. They ask for the same thing. She said, they come and they ask for inventory and they ask for marketing money. And that's all they ask for. And that's all we've been ever asking for. So she said, well, why do I need to have a piece of their company? Why don't I just come up with this new model where I just take a little tiny bit of their sales and everybody's happy and it doesn't really cost very much. And I make money and they make money and everybody's happy. Anyway, I think she's one of the most interesting founders I've heard talk, and she provided us an incredible service. And for a revenue redemption model, those are the ones that I would put at the top of the list, because you can't really screw it up.
Yeah. So, and for any of you that aren't as familiar with revenue redemption, maybe you've picked up the pieces, but this is a different way of financing companies whereby you essentially get money from an investor and it's paid back based upon the revenue that you get. And so you're making an agreement that there's some sort of cut from the revenue that goes back to the investor. It's nice because then it's kind of sales dependent in terms of when you pay it back. You don't have a fixed loan payment to pay back every month. But on the other hand, there are some interesting ways of converting it. It really works well if you have an engine already established for making money. And I think that's kind of where you guys came in, was you basically now knew how to make money. You needed to get some money in to buy inventory. You needed to spend some money on marketing, and you would then sell shoes. And so the revenue model worked.
Well, I would correct you on one thing, Kai. I mean, we know how to make sales. We know how to run our business, and we know how to function. And we have something that works pretty well. Making money is something that is a big challenge. And we're still working toward that. We're still in the throes of hovering in that, that gray zone of sort of post revenue, but pre profit, or, however you want to define it. There's so many different ways of looking at it.
We'd love to find that machine that says you put in $1 and you get 5 out, but as it turns out, it's not actually that easy.
Yeah, well, I misspoke there, talking about making money being the revenue side and the profit side. But I want to just for those of you in the audience, I want to turn it over to you, for some more questions from those of you that are in the room here in a second. You can put those in the chat, or we'll flip it up here in a second for you to turn it on. But I want to come back to one point, though, on that before moving on, which is, was it a decision at some point that you didn't want to give up equity, that you looked for these alternative ways of financing like revenue redemption? Or was it a situation where an equity investment just didn't make sense and revenue is what you could find and you could make it work. What was your thinking around the traditional equity approach versus what you ended up doing?
I think what we knew is that giving away equity is a very important decision. And so it was never that we didn't want to give away equity. It's just that we wanted to make a really smart decision about it. And so we really, to be completely honest with you, I don't think we really had any opportunities where we were faced with that decision. It simply hasn't really come up. I mean, we have our safe agreements, which is kind of our original investment, and those don't require an equity share until you convert. So whether we've avoided that or whether we haven't been presented with the opportunity, I think we've been very judicious about making sure we don't give away equity prematurely. I mean, one thing we always wanted to make sure is we had equity available to give away when we needed it. And I think we're in good shape from that standpoint, because we think that we are probably going to be in that position at some point in the next few years, where we will have to be willing to give away equity. And I think we will be up for that. We just haven't quite run into that. Nobody's, it hasn't come up.
No one's written the check big enough to attract that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Good. Well, before we take a couple of questions from those the folks that are here, I got two final questions just to kind of tee it up, and I want to ask. I'm going to do this kind of counterintuitively, I think, but Ayla, if you could change one thing about the original ideation, business modeling, kind of early stage of trying to think about how this business was going to be built, the original idea, the original business model, the outsourcing of the production, what do you think you would change now if you had a chance to go all the way back and change something about the early ideation phase or business model development phase of your business?
Sounds like you're passing me a magic wand, and I do love those. That's really hard, Kai. I'm somewhere in stone. I'm going to put what you told me when we first got out of Startup Weekend, and we said, well, we're going to go make a prototype now. And you said, yeah, that's going to take you about 2 years. We said, no, well, and almost 2 years on the dot, we got our first prototype from Taiwan. And boy, they didn't look anything like the beautiful designs our designer had made on paper. If there had been a way to tighten up that process of taking the shoe from an idea to an actual product we could sell, what we didn't know at the time is we were at the head of a curve, and that curve was shoes with more expansion. Because at the time that we were talking about this idea, there really wasn't anything. And at the time we're talking now, our third year in sales, there's a lot. And so none of them have the patent or the really cool expansion in the right areas for people with swelling. But more and more, those bigger companies are catching up to the idea that comfort shoes are the biggest market. And that's what everybody's moving into. So if I could have sped up that prototyping process, and if you hadn't been right, it would have been great.
I'm not sure which column to put that one in. So, Laura, I'm going to take the question, same kind of question. What would you change? But I want you to focus a little bit more on the later stage of the business planning, the financing, the launching of the business. What would you change at this point if there was something that you could have done a little bit differently?
Oh my gosh, that is a really hard question. I'm glad Ayla went first because she had an actual answer. I mean, my only answer to that is I just wish we could have moved faster. What could we have done to move faster? I could have quit my job sooner, but I don't know. In all honesty, that's what I would have done. if
Mm.
I wouldn't necessarily suggest other people do that, but I've got the magic wand where I get to 2020 hindsight. If I had the magic wand in 2020 hindsight, I probably would quit my job sooner and start to work on this full time more, especially right when we launched, because I hung in with my job for another year after we launched, and that would have been quality time to use, to really be focusing on. But I was scared. I didn't want to not have money.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, fair enough. So do the two of you think you've built what you expected to build when you first started this? 2015, 16, you hit a startup weekend. You said we're going to build a company. Are you doing what you thought that was going to look like?
Oh, I think we're doing way better. I must have had low expectations, but I think what we built has far surpassed what I think I had envisioned at the time. And again, just kind of going back to this personal touch that we have with our customers, I could have never have imagined that. I could have never imagined we would get reviews that said, "You changed my life." My husband can finally wear shoes, and it's just, that's the stuff that kind of keeps you going. And again, that kind of goes back to, do you have a really good idea and do you understand the market? And is it making an impact? It may not be a super sexy product, but man, if you get those kinds of emails, they will keep you going through really tough times.
Super. Well, I'm curious if there are folks with some questions that you'd like to ask. I've tried leaving some time here again with Laura and Ayla. We've also got more time in some future sessions coming up as we work towards the startup weekend. It'll be an online one, October 1st, and a no code. I'll put the link to the session in there. But if you have questions, either you can type them in the chat, or if you just want to turn your microphone and video on, I'd love to just hear from you specifically about questions or thoughts that you have about what we've been discussing today. There's the link for the weekend in the chat.
Kai, this is Justin. I had a question about the prototyping process. So sounds like it was a 2-year-long journey. I've got a hardware manufacturing based new product startup that we're launching, and we've gone through a similar multi-year journey to try and get the first prototypes going. What were the challenges that it sounded like you described at the end that there was a challenge that the first version came back not with what you expected at the end of 2 years. What led to that? And what would you do differently in order to shorten that cycle other than quitting your job earlier?
Right. I think, it's really hard when you don't know what you don't know. So we were moving as fast as we could. Your product, it's hardware, right?
Sorry, it's actually plastics. It's a rainwater harvesting tank that's rotationally molded, and so it's kind of complex.
Yeah, I think the difference in your journey versus our journey, and I'm making some assumptions here, but we were entering an industry that we did not know anything about. So we didn't know anything about shoes. We didn't know anything about shoe manufacturing. We had to rely on getting ourselves connected to that industry, and that took a while. We ended up getting well connected, but that's really what took the majority of the time in that 2.5 years. And that's the main thing that I would say we did. And maybe I'm changing my answer, Kai, to the earlier question. I think if we could have gotten connected to that the shoe industry sooner, we could have really been building those bridges earlier than we did. But we were looking for a needle in a haystack. We didn't know where to go. We didn't know how to find it. So as you're developing your product, I'm kind of assuming you already have some industry connections, but if you don't, that would be get started sooner rather than later.
Yeah, and for us, finding those connections really led us to a manufacturing agent who could really speak the language of the factory, and was kind of this point person between your designer and then also your factory. They're the ones beating up the factory when they're not meeting the deadline. They're the ones communicating back kind of in a technical manner to your designer. And that might be you in the situation, but it certainly was not us, as Laura is saying. Now, after about 6 years, we kind of have that technical ability to look at a shoe and be able to state what changes need to be made. Laura especially is great at that. But that took us years to build up the ability to do that. So again, finding a manufacturing agent, and if you don't know your industry very well, going to trade shows, getting connected, passing your card around.
I would say for anybody who is looking at manufacturing, I would not be afraid of a manufacturing agent, by the way. Somebody who can help negotiate between you and the factory, your product and the factory. You just have to work out a good deal. But somebody who knows that factory and has relationships with that factory, or who can get you to the right factory, that person is probably worth their weight in gold. And I think a lot of people, when we failed on our first round of prototypes, I'd love to pull it out of the drawer and show you, by the way, because it was so non-functional. I think, we just didn't have, we were trying to work with a factory on our own, and it was not possible. We didn't have enough experience or information.
And just to kind of expand on that a little more, you're probably gonna have to pay this person up front. And that's what we had to do with our manufacturing agent.
But we didn't, Ayla. That was part of the beautiful thing with Mark.
Mm-hmm. But we have paid him, though. I guess that's my point. We paid him cash. It's not just like he's taking a piece of the equity of the company. But the great thing about Mark is very early on, he understood the value of our idea. And that's where, going back to the very beginning point, having that strong idea is so important.
Cool. Other questions for Ayla or Laura?
I have a question, and this could be for anyone, but I'm going to pick on Laura because I've been doing a little bit of Google searching, and I've discovered someone has been a singer-songwriter for a couple of decades, and that resonates with me because I started with a variety of arts long before I got into any kind of business, and for me it was very challenging to make that transition. And it wasn't until much later that I recognized how to leverage those early things that I experienced. And I'm wondering if this resonates with you at all, if you could reflect on what kind of skills you experienced transferring from, like an artistic background and the arts co-op into the startup space. And I'm asking specifically with an interest to how can we help other founders who have a very artsy background but no business skills recognize what their superpowers are and pivot into something interesting like you have?
Wow, that's a big question. I have a lot of big feelings on that one. I think there's a lot of transportable skills from arts to business. I think there's really a lot of meat there. Everybody's art is so unique. I think usually there's a lot of different ways individuals are building their own skill set. I had a lot of business skills. Already. I think there's a lot of artists that don't have business skills. And for those people, I almost want to answer your question in reverse, because I think artists are business people. They are entrepreneurs. And they often are completely bypass a lot of the business training or even the idea that business skills would be required in art in order to do art. And that's usually not the case. The ones that I hang around a lot of artists, and the ones that make it are good business people. So I think that my roundabout answer is there are many, many skills that are transferable in both directions, from arts to business. And I would love to see those bridges built better so that artists could have more skills, business skills. But, you know, I mean, off the top of my head, obviously, one of the best skills that a performing musician has is just being able to be in front of other people, talk to other people, and be in front of a crowd. Now, I'm not going to say that I was just like a duck takes to water. You get up and you start pitching and you start asking for money and that's super comfortable. No, that is not the way it works. You still have to build that skill set to pitch and ask for money and all that kind of stuff. But I'm pretty sure that having a performance background where I had trained myself to be in front of people and be vulnerable was an asset in being able to articulate our business idea and what was the impact we were trying to achieve.
Mm-hmm. Very nice, Laura. Thank you. And good question.
I need some Spotify listeners too.
That's one of the things I've always told people is never pass up the opportunity to make the ask. So Laura's looking for Spotify folks on there. Wonderful. Is there anybody else with a quick final question? Otherwise, we're at the witching hour, and I want to wrap this up. But anybody else got a quick question they want to throw out there? Okay. So again, appreciate everyone joining this, and especially to Laura and Ayla for taking the time out of their busy day to join us and share some thoughts on your journey on this. One thing I'd like to share with everybody is kind of a go-to resource. It's a book that may not come up with my filter here. It's by Catherine Bateson, called Composing a Life. And anytime I get into this subject, I like to reflect on it. Catherine Bateson is the daughter of Margaret Mead, a fairly popular, well-known anthropologist. And in her book, she chronicles the life of 5 women and the paths that they take in their lives. And I have found that this has been a really valuable book for anybody, not just women, who are trying to navigate the question of where is life taking me and where am I taking it. She begins the book with an allegory where she talks about this painter who wakes up in the morning, or excuse me, 2 painters. One who wakes up in the morning with this crystal clear vision in their head about the painting they're going to create that day. And they go into their studio, they find the canvas, the paints, the brushes, and they work on that painting that they saw in their head at the beginning of the day. And they end up with a masterpiece at the end of the day. There's the other artist that gets up in the morning and says, I'm going to make a painting, without knowing really what that painting will be, but passionate about moving into the challenge of creating that painting. And they go into the studio and they find the leftover canvases from something else they were working on. They find the brushes, some of the paints that they had bought but not used, some of the ones that are half used. And they pull together the resources that they have had from before, and they use it to build and construct a painting. At the end of the day, they've created a masterpiece. And her story and this allegory paints this picture of people who move into these opportunities, and sometimes they have a crystal clear picture of exactly where they're going to be and what they're trying to accomplish, in which case all of us really just need to step out of the way and say, how do we help you get to where you're going to go, and let them succeed in that area. Other folks move into this space with an idea to try and accomplish something, and they build off of the resources that they brought to them in their life before, and in the end they will still create that masterpiece along the way, including a few partially started canvases that don't work out. We know how it works. And so it is, I think, with all of us as founders and the stories that we can share about that journey. Some are clear, crisp, and focused. Some are willing to take the long journey to figure out the path to get there. And in her book, she really explores the lives of these 5 women and all of the challenges that they face along the way in terms of family and partners and professional careers and challenges. And I think it's a good resource for people that are interested in this general topic that we started off with today, which is the women and female startup founders and what experiences they had. And I'm so grateful to be able to have a few minutes with Laura and Ayla today, and look forward to more conversations with this group and others like it in the future. So thank you all for joining us today. Justin, just for clarification, I think for those that would like to stick around, I don't know if you're going to just leave this open for us, if for anybody that wants to chat a little bit longer, or if you're going to move us over to MeetAway. But can you just wrap up and let us know if there's a transition at this point for the group, for anybody that wants to stick around? But for those of you that joined us, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kai, and thanks everybody for coming today. We're gonna stick around here. We tried switching away to AirMeet last week to do some post-event networking, and it was a bit of a hassle. So we're gonna stick around here. So feel free to hang out a little bit longer, whoever you are, speakers, hosts, guests, and make sure to turn on your camera so that we can know that you're here. And if you're done for the evening, then feel free to check out and head home. We're good to go.
Thanks, Kai. Thanks, Justin. This was great.
Yeah, thank you for coming. Your stories are amazing and fabulous. I'd love to talk more about your manufacturing experiences.
Absolutely. Anytime. Bye.
Bye. We got Becky, Michael, and Suzanne.
Yep. Suzanne, are you in there?
Yep, we're here.
What are you and Duke up to today?
Well, Duke's laying on the ground. He's been introduced to watermelon and plums so far.
Okay.
Well, good.
Good. What did you think about the startup discussion?
I thought it was really nice. A lot of it I wasn't familiar with the terminology, but it's always great to hear the experience of people. It's kind of like reading a history book with all dates and how that really sucks. Or you can read a story about people who lived during that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say the latter applies more to this conversation. I'm here with Louisa. Do you want to add anything?
No. Thank you.
Hi, Louisa.
Hi.